Hi there, my name's Donghua. How do minions work? How do you freeze a wave? How do you get a wave to push by itself? How do you get a wave to pull by itself? How do you make a super wave that takes out towers by themselves? I'm gonna explain all of that in this video and more. Minions are basically like League of Legends sperm. There's a lot of them, they die really easily, and their only objective is forward. There are 3 laws that govern minions, and if you understand these laws, you'll understand how to control the minions. The first law is the law of 4. Basically, if your minion wave has 4 more minions in it than the enemy minion wave, no matter where it is on the map, it will push until it's stopped by either a tower or an enemy player. That's it. That's the first law. It's very simple. Just have 4 more full HP minions in your wave and your wave will push no matter where it is. The second law is the law of backup. This law is the most important because basically it just dictates whether or not a minion wave will push or pull towards you. Let's take a look at these minions. Blue side has 6 minions and red side has 5 minions. Which way will the minions push? The minions will push towards blue side because, and this is very important, the backup minions get to the front faster. The minions are fighting closer to the red nexus, and so the red minions get to the front faster. They get to the front and they get to do their damage to the blue minions first. They are also able to get into position in order to fight the next wave more efficiently. Backup arrives first, they get into position first, they deal damage first, and so they push first. This is why the law of 4 is important, because no matter how close the backup is, they will only spawn every 30 seconds, and having 4 extra minions basically ensures that your wave will progressively and eventually get bigger. The third law is the law that cannons are douchebags. Cannon minions are assholes because they sometimes screw with the law of backup. Stat-wise, a cannon minion is worth about 2.5 caster minions. However, if a cannon minion isn't focused down by the other minion wave, sometimes he will get the value of 3 or even sometimes 4 minions. A cannon minion is basically like a really tanky Fed 80 carry. If you don't focus him, the other minions are all going to die. If you look at these 2 waves, they're completely equal until the point where the blue cannon minion gets focused down first and the red cannon minion basically just gets to wreak havoc and destroy the rest of the blue wave, and so the red wave gets to push first. If a full cannon minion wave takes on a regular wave, you can consider that cannon minion to be worth about 4 minions. Now, how do we manipulate these minions? How do we get them to work for us? Here's a chart that shows 4 different zones. This chart basically shows you how many more minions your wave is required to have in order for your wave to push forward. If you do not have the number of creeps that this chart shows, then inevitably the other side will push against you. If you fully understand this chart, you'll basically fully understand whether or not a minion wave will push or pull towards you. I've just killed Irelia 1v1, but I need to push the wave back, otherwise a bunch of minions will die to the tower. I cleaned these guys out, but there's 1 minion left over in my wave. Now there's 2 caster minions left, 1 is almost dead, and 1 is still fairly healthy. If I had left these guys as the current state, eventually my wave would have pushed up forward, unless I teleported. If I had left the wave as it was, Irelia would have gotten a small minion advantage. There's no point in giving your opponent any advantages, so instead I just shoved out the wave as soon as I could, and now all the minions just hit the tower. And Irelia loses a small minion advantage because of it. Now, how do you freeze a wave? The most common way that people freeze is by tanking a huge minion wave. They just stand still, tank the minions, wait until the next wave comes, and then last hit the minion wave. This is not good freezing. I just lost half my HP to the minions. That is not... When you freeze, you're trying to gain an advantage. What advantage was gained when I lost half my HP? Yes, the minions are pushing favorably, but I just lost half of my HP. How is that worth? There are several techniques to make a wave push favorably towards you. The most common way that you see in professional games is the hold technique. Players will stand in this spot, group up the minions, and then allow the minions to continue forward. Remember those zones I showed you? Well, right now you're in the yellow zone, and the yellow zone requires your wave to have 2 more minions in order to push. The melee minions and the ranged minions are also grouped up in lines of 3. They are in the best position to do damage. You know sometimes how your team runs in one at a time and dies one at a time? That happens to minions as well. By pulling the minions like this, you're grouping them up and making your minions die. Now this technique, I just call it the drag technique. And this technique, you can basically keep this going on forever. You can drag these minions all pretty much infinitely. So you build the enemy wave up to from anywhere from 4 to 6 extra full health minions. And you keep them in that spot. And as soon as your entire minion wave dies, you drag them back out into the lane. This is very important because if you don't do this, the melee minions on the enemy team will eventually get close enough to tower, and tower will basically just crush the melee minions. And the enemy will only be getting about 3 minions of reinforcements each wave. By dragging them back out, you're ensuring that the melee minions don't get too close to the turret, and you can pretty much keep this freeze going on indefinitely. The other technique is to simply face tank the minions and wait for the next wave. If you're going to do this, you need to make sure of a few things. 1, your champion has some form of sustain or has some kind of consumable. And 2, you want to have 4 to 5 enemy minions. You don't want the minions to be doing damage for your enemy. So you want to have the least amount of minions possible in order to keep this freeze. If you need the minions to stop hitting you, simply go into a brush and you'll drop minion aggro. Minions are basically like Grand Theft Auto cops. If they lose sight of you, they basically forget that you exist. So why do you freeze a wave? Freezing a wave makes last hitting easier. It makes your opponent's last hitting harder because there's more minions on his side. It makes your opponent easier to gank and makes yourself harder to gank. And if you're ahead, it's a really good way to zone your opponent off the minion wave. Now, when should you not freeze? If your opponent is roaming and they're in another lane, you should not be freezing. If your opponent teleports to another lane, you should not be freezing. If your opponent has joined a team fight, you should not be freezing. The easiest way to lose a game is to freeze and farm all game. Freezing is really good when your opponent is basically forced to stay top lane or forced to take jungle minions. Freezing is not good when your opponent can roam really well. If your opponent is roaming, you should be pushing and trying to take a tower. When your opponent roams, he's helping out his other lanes. When you take a tower, you're doing the exact same by giving your team global gold. Now, how do you break a freeze? Here's how you don't break a freeze. If you have one ranged ability that does AoE damage, do not randomly throw it out like this guy has. What you'll basically be doing is making the wave even easier to freeze, because now your opponent has more minions to play with. What you want to do is use your ranged ability to last hit these minions instead. So at the very least, you're still getting some type of gold. If your opponent is ahead, you should not be greedy and try to break the freeze with auto attacks, because you will probably get destroyed and you'll probably lose a kill on top of losing all the farm. If your champion does not have reliable long-ranged wave clear, then what you should be doing is you should be roaming. You can't stay in that lane too long anyway, so you might as well go and try to help a different lane. If you're not behind and you want to break a freeze, you need to ward first and check the brushes for their jungler. Oftentimes people will freeze in order to set up a gank for their jungler. Now, finally, how do you create a super wave? How do you create a super wave that takes out inhibitor towers by itself? Well, first you're gonna need a lot of minions. A minion wave spawns every 30 seconds. A giant minion wave is often composed of minions from 6 different minion waves. That is 3 minutes worth of minions. How do you create that? First, if 2 equal minion lines are fighting closer to your nexus, that wave will eventually push and become a super wave. If it's in the middle, what you want to do is you want to clear out 2 caster minions. Melee minions are significantly more tankier than caster minions, and so they take a really long time to kill. By the time those guys die, your next minion wave will have already arrived, and your minions will be stronger because you killed off those 2 extra casters. A mega minion wave that can take out towers generally takes at least 2.5 minutes to build up. The ideal time to start this is about a minute ahead of a major objective. So let's say Dragon is coming up in the next minute. This Mega Minion wave will take out a good chunk of a tower. The weakness of this is if you mistime this or your opponent gets to get back to this lane quicker than you thought, then you will basically have lost 3 to 4 waves of farm. If it's successful, you'll have gotten a tower. If it's unsuccessful, you'll have lost a shit ton of farm. And that is most of what you need to know about minions.